you in the rock and roll class?
Jim, I wanted to say something else.
Okay, yep.
Marlon, between
what'd
you
you
and
think?
me, now you may disagree with me, that class is so bad.
Oh, you're,
It is-
I can't hear you.
That class is so bad.
Bad, yeah, I know. Florence,
hello all. This is our
she's
September
just not a teacher.
Squirrel Hill Historical Society meeting. And we're gonna have a good one tonight. And we got a special announcement a little later.
Can't hear you.
Okay, is that better? Okay, thank you. The first thing, I'll just tell you, our officer and our board, we're all do this for no charge, but we have a good time. I'm Jim Hammond, I'm one of the co-vice presidents, and Wayne Bostinger, he's not here tonight, he's a co-vice president. Helen Wilson, down here, is our VP and our newsletter editor. Todd Miller and Toby Chapman. Toby's here.
Yay.
Okay. They're our program coordinators. Stanley Klein, he's our membership coordinator. Tony Inavina, he's over here as an email coordinator. Audrey Glickman's our media support. She's back on the camera. We have Jean Binstock. She's not here tonight. She generally runs our back table. We have a new board member, Charles, I think it's Sukap, yeah. And he's a new board member from last board meeting, and he's going to help with some historical research. We have our past president, of course, Michael Ehrman. He's got everything started here, and it's been running real well. Now we're going to have a Tony and Helen both want to say something tonight. Tony on the Neil Log House.
Right. Yeah, another duty I have is as president of the Friends of Neil Log House, which is a collaboration between the Historical Society and SHOC, Squirrel Hill Urban Coalition. Over there is the event poster that we have that you should take a look at before you leave. That's actually the same format as a new sign that we understand is going to be made and installed shortly right in front of the Neil Log House up in Shenley Park. You can read about us on the website, of course. There's a link right off the home page. But the one event, the primary event coming up to benefit the Neil Log House is something really special. We've been sending e-blasts out about. You're welcome to pick up a flyer from the back table before you leave. It's 3 days of special events at the Henry Kerner House on Negley Hill. And you may or may not know of that little structure. It does have historic designation, and our member and friend Carolyn Boyce, who owns the house, has actually put in for National Historic Designation for the house. She has very generously offered the use of the house, and we put together art tours, guided art tours, and other events, including a lecture at the JCC and a Pittsburgh premiere of a documentary movie about the life and art of Henry Kerner at the Manor Theater. So that'll be like Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, October 14th, 15th, and 16th. So pick up a flyer. Think about attending one or more of those. The instructions are right on the main page of our home site and the home page of the Urban Coalition, where you can actually register online. The other thing I'll point out to you, if you have grandkids and you want to take a special thing home, Helen Wilson put this together for the night market. You could actually make your own replica of the Neil Log House, put this together and tape it. It's really a wonderful little thing. So both of those are on the back table. And Jim, I'll give it back to you.
What are they building
Give it to
next
Helen.
door to Kerner's house?
I'm sorry, the question?
There's some kind of building going on
Probably
next
another
door.
house. I
Do you
don't
know, have you
Oh,
been there?
that's her neighbor. Yes, there's a major house renovation just up the hill on
Wouldn't she have
Negley Hill.
waited till?
That's not related to her property.
Okay. It's such a mess.
Okay, hi everyone. Just very quickly, We're planning a Turner Cemetery History Walk again this year, and that's October the, I think Saturday is the 8th. And we haven't decided on the time. It'll be in the newsletter, but we have some new tombstones. So what's old is new, because these are brand new tombstones for our Revolutionary War soldiers. So look for details in the newsletter, and it'll also be on the website. We are looking for volunteers to come and help set up. We get here about 6:30. People demand the table in the back, help with the equipment. So if you're interested, let one of us know. In the back, there's Squirrel Hill magazines, the new one that just came out. Please help yourself, they're free. Our books are back there. And the last thing is our membership drive starts in October, so prepare to be, yeah, starting again. So that's it, and back to Jim.
Thank you. Yeah, the membership drive is very important, of course, and we have a little over 200 members right now, so it's really pretty good considering we had a hard year. You know, the other nice projects coming up is going to be, we're doing this calendar again for between Shook and Squirrel Hill Historical Society, and if you haven't seen it, it's really great. And we have it's fun. I hand them out to different relatives and stuff, and they've got all kinds of dates in there, and it's and good pictures. So that'll be coming up, and we'll be telling you later where you can buy that.
Yeah, it's ready to go to the printer to be laid out, so it should be a few weeks.
Okay. We'll let everybody know. Probably another blast. Okay. We're also going to continue to have our live and Zoom programs. And we'll see how that's been going pretty well. Well, tonight we're going to have JaQuay Carter is going to give us a nice overview of Hazelwood's past, present, and future. I'm not going to say too much about all he does, but there is one thing we did find out today, and it's very, very important, and it's somebody's birthday. So, JK, you step up here and be the birthday boy and give a great presentation.
Thank you so much for that great introduction. And yes, it is my birthday today, which can be quite embarrassing when all the attention is on you and you're getting all kind of smiles and claps and everything, but I really do appreciate it. This was my choice for this date, which I think I picked last November. So it did seem like it would be a really good day because it was my birthday at that time. And I'm so happy to be here with you guys, spending some of my birthday with you. So very, very cool.
Thank you.
I was actually born in 1983, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as we get further into the presentation. But we're certainly going to go way back past that time, way back into the past there, although that's about 39 years in the past today. But we're going to go back quite a bit today, beginning in 1792. So I'll be really happy to talk to you guys more about that in the next slide here. Alright, so as we turn the page here, I'm just going to introduce myself a little bit here. Of course, I am JaQuay Carter. I'm a local historian, researcher, writer, a bunch of other hats that I wear as well that I'll share with you as we make it through this slide presentation. But as you see, mostly I am the founder and CEO of the Greater Hazelwood Historical Society. And I'll begin using the mic as I should have been. So again, I am the founder and CEO of the Greater Hazelwood Historical Society, which I have worked with the Squirrel Hill Historical Society. I think this is my fourth presentation in many different ways. My last was actually at the Woods House, which we'll talk a lot about in the next slides. And also a tour that I did with the group at the Levi Furnaces, National Historic Landmark with the Rivers of Still Heritage Corporation, which I also work as a historian interpretive specialist. And I couldn't fit it on here, but also a community outreach coordinator. So quite a long title I have with Rivers of Still. But as you can see, me actually standing on the steps there in Hazelwood. Those are the Tuliman steps, one of the longest, or actually the longest set in Hazelwood of the city steps. I think there's about 260 odd steps there. So I'm really at the tippy top actually, where Gladstone Street is at. So it actually runs beginning at Tuliman Street around Monongahela Street at the bottom where you can't quite see, and then runs all the way up to Gladstone Street there. And as you see in the distance, a little bit of Mill 19 actually. So we'll be talking a lot about that as we make it through this presentation as well. One of the logo designs that I had done for the Greater Hazelwood Historical Society was this sketching that was done in pencil. And I really loved the artwork that Lori Marshall had done. She had actually done a sketch of me while I was presenting at a meeting in Hazelwood. And at the end, she showed me this pencil sketch that she had done of me really quickly, and it was so fabulous. I said, "Oh my gosh, I would love for you to do a piece for my organization." And she came up with this whole design after, some different notes that I had given her about the railroads and sort of the industry, the bridges, Glenwood Bridge specifically, and the hazelnut tree, which Hazelwood did derive its name from. And we'll definitely talk about that a lot more. I do have the date 1868 there, which is basically when Peebles Township would be dissolved and Hazelwood would basically become the name of the town. And then 2018, of course, is when I began in January with my work, which is coming up on 5 years now. So I'm really excited about that as well. A lot has happened in those 5 years, and I'll share some of that with you guys. But it has been a great journey to the past and even through the future, because one of the mottos that Lori and I came up with was honoring our past and inventing our future. So a lot of times history is just stuck in the past, and it really doesn't have an effect on future. But in Hazelwood, it was very unique because all of the development of sort of the economically depressed neighborhood since the 1980s basically did need to refer to its history to see what buildings used to be there and how things were and sort of what the population used to be at that time, and just all sorts of things that would come into play with preserving a lot of the buildings that are there. A lot of that research and historical consultation I would do with a lot of the developers. So the past has been a part of the future, and I'm really excited to share this journey with you guys as we make it through the slide presentation.
Isn't that pretty?
So we are turning the pages of history as we will do through this presentation. And of course, the past is really almost as much a work of the imagination as the future. So that was a quote that I really loved, which spoke to the fact that, just like I said, the past is actually very much a part of the present and the future. So this presentation being Hazelwood's past, present, and future, I thought that quote was very apropos. So we will begin in our book here with John Woods, okay? And John Woods, of course, would be one of the founding fathers of Hazelwood. Of course, the Woods in his name would later be lent to the town, but I'll get to that story because it comes a little bit down the road here. But at this time, as you can see in the top left corner there, you can see that this bottom portion, which is lining the river, actually all belonged to John Woods. This would have been from 4 Mile Run until 9 Mile Run. So you actually see on a later map here where Brown Station is at is just about the edge of John Woods' property, where it is marked with his name actually on this one, but if you look a little closer, his names are actually, and that he had been inherited this land, and then he would also, later purchase parts of the land as well. But I found it really fascinating, that when you look at the modern map and sort of the layout of Hazelwood, and then of course all the way up to 9 Mile Run where Brown's Station, and of course Captain Sam Brown's mansion would have been, which I'm sure you guys know a lot about there, that Helen and everyone has shared in the books. But actually that was a part of Scotch Bottom Farms, which this whole area was called at one time. And you do see a picture, which is pretty rare, actually, of John Woods here. He was a Federalist, an attorney involved in the Risky Rebellion. So he actually built this house that we'll talk a lot more about as well, and is where I last visited, or last was with the Squirrel Historical Society while we were having lunch there. Quite a wonderful place that has been preserved, and I'm glad to have been a part of the research and sort of redevelopment of this site. So really, really cool. Definitely would advise anyone who hasn't been there to go there and check out some of these Scottish fare pub. Definitely the fish and chips is my favorite. But this property here, as you can see, right under here, this would be where Fort Squirrel Hill was located, sort of at the edge of Hazelwood, going into Greenfield. So we'll discuss that even some more as we go through as well. But here's actually a picture of Brown's mansion there before it was moved up the hill, as you guys know. But just going back to this old map, as you can see, this was sort of the edge of the 9 Mile Run, and right around where Brown's mansion would have been. So that would have been owned by John Woods as well, from 4 Mile Run to 9 Mile Run, as we know. This is just a little bit of his will, which I know is very hard for you guys to see, probably, but in this portion, he is actually willing his servants and household items to his wife, Theodosia Woods. So that's just the top portion of his will that could fit on the slide. But Hazelwood definitely, would owe its, history to John Woods. His family would own this same property that he owned for another 100 years after his purchase of this property around the turn of the 19th century there. So we're going to go ahead and turn the page here as we take a closer look at what happened at the Woods house that he built in 1792. And oftentimes it is quoted that this house is the oldest house in Pittsburgh, which I'm certainly not going to get into the fine tunings of all of that with this particular group, because of course we have one of the debated structures, the Neil Log House, which is definitely built older, but of course has been rebuilt. This Woods house has never, been rebuilt at all. So it is with its original, stone, at least from 1792, and has been rebuilt and restored to its late, 17th century glory there. So one of the things that I found in the 1930s was this article that said the Woods house was built 130 years ago, but few are familiar with it. Now, that was actually the case years, after this article had been done as well. A lot of people, including myself, who grew up in Hazelwood and saw this house, had no idea of the historical significance of it. It was covered up by ivy and really looked abandoned and dilapidated by the time I remember it, of course. But even in the 1930s, it was not a place that people really knew what happened there. So of course, one of the really important things that happened there was that Stephen Collins Foster visited there. He was visiting his childhood friend Rachel Keller Woods, who you can see seated at the piano here. And it's actually this piano where he would compose his material, some of his greatest and well-known tunes, such as Jenny with the Light Brown Hair. Also for Mrs. Keller Woods, he would write Where Is Thy Spirit? Mary for her sister, but he actually would write a song for her as well. why the name escapes me now, of course. But he actually sat there at that same piano and wrote. And this is sort of, in the 1880s, they took this picture when Mrs. Keller Woods was, of course, quite old. But her husband was Sheriff Harry Woods. So that's basically, you know, he was the nephew of John Woods. And that's how they lived at this house, which this piano was actually only one of two pianos in the Hazelwood area. There was another one owned by George King Flowers, who was a musician. And Stephen Foster would actually use his piano as well, and was friends of his as well. But this house, you know, basically also had an African-American servant by the name of Nellie Brown, who on a census I found, her name was actually Nellie Brown, but Stephen Foster, you know, sort of with a poetic license, sort of didn't think Nellie Brown sounded good in the song, so he changed it to Nellie Bly. And then we have the famous song Nellie Bly, which is one of my favorites of Stephen Foster. And I grew up sort of hearing that story, that there was an African-American servant in this home, and she poked her head out of the cellar, and while Stephen Foster was playing this music, and I really thought it was a myth. I really did not think this person actually existed. I thought this was just a story that he came up with. But in fact, there was an African-American servant, one of the only African-Americans living in Hazelwood at the time, living with the Woods family, and she had lived with them when they lived in Allegheny City before that, and she basically was treated as a member of the family. A lot of people have come to the Wood House and asked, oh, you know, is this house associated with slavery at all? And I say, not that I know of. There were, of course, servants, which was very usual at the time. There were also European servants, there were all sorts of different race servants. So that wasn't really, you know, there wasn't really much negativity associated with this house as it pertains to slavery or anything like that. And speaking of slavery, you know, I have done my own research and have come to find that a lot of the music that Stephen Foster was writing was basically just a social commentary of the times that he was living in. I don't think these were thoughts that he actually came up with on his own. But that's just my opinion, and it really was a look at it through a 21st century lens, which I did at the Lawrenceville Historical Society. But, you know, I really have advocated for his statue to be kept in Pittsburgh and, you know, to be brought to Hazelwood. I had advocated for that, and that didn't really go off so well. But I will still continue that fight because the statue is actually on its way to Los Angeles today, and we're not sure, you know, what its fate could be. So I definitely will resume my look into that whole thing and try to advocate for it to remain in Pittsburgh at least somewhere. So that's a whole nother story. But this place, very, very historic, and great to go there. The next time you are there, you'll remember all of this history that also was there. One other thing that the headline said was, Stephen Foster was friend of Hazelwood family, descendants of city's first surveyor, which would have been John Wood's father, George Woods, who would have laid out the city along with John as well. But it said that pigeons grouse there now. And it's just this house that was just sitting away, and when you see it today, it's just completely different than that look. So I love those images. So let's turn the page here, and just a little look at the history of Peoples Township. As we mentioned, before Hazelwood would even retain that name, it would be referred to as Peoples Township. Even earlier than that, of course, it would be referred to just as Squirrel Hill, because the whole hill, of course, was called Squirrel Hill, including Hazelwood, Greenfield, and what we know today as Squirrel Hill, of course. But looking at this map here, get my pointer, so we will see Peoples Township here. You always see Hazelwood sort of being identified as sort of at the bend here. You'll see it again here and again here. And I brought this map from the Lawrenceville Historical Society, which of course was a part of Peoples as well, and so was Squirrel Hill. And then you can later see how they would start to divide. By 1833, Peoples would be formed out of Pitt Township, and then by 1868, as I talked about, that basically would be the when Peoples Township was dissolved, and basically the town would start to be called Hazelwood. You could even already see the name Hazelwood mentioned, even though it was still Peoples Township at that time, or Another term would have been, of course, 23rd Ward, which would have been the name of the area at that time, which was not easily identifiable, because a lot of places could have been the 23rd Ward at that time, or a lot of places could have been People's Township. So by having Hazelwood, which again I will explain in the next couple slides here how Hazelwood will retain its name, but this is a really good look at the area before this all would happen. And at this time, I love this article because it said the local board of the People's District 23rd Ward have not yet taken any definite action in the matter of building a new schoolhouse, because the failure to agree upon a site, several locations were considered and examined, but it was found that they were not central and would not accommodate the children on account of the length of the ward, and none was chosen. Eventually, however, we hope to be able to notice the erection of a handsome school building at Hazelwood, which is without doubt the most convenient point for the new school. This will of course be a graded school, and then with the primary schools on Squirrel Hill. Notice how they say on Squirrel Hill, not in Squirrel Hill or at Squirrel Hill, because that whole hill was referred to as Squirrel Hill at the time, and at Brown Station, which we know where that is at, on the Carnersville Railroad, and pupils will be entirely accommodated. So it actually was saying that the central school for everyone in the ward, including those on Squirrel Hill, would have been in Hazelwood. So there was a lot of walking back then, as people would have had to go up and down those hills to go to just the centrally located school in Hazelwood. I thought that was fascinating at the time. So now we get into how I was talking about Hazelwood coming up with its name. And of course the area, the hazel reference is in reference to the hazelnut trees that were plentiful in Hazelwood at one time, of course, and were basically forested out by 1850. Now this picture is around the 1860s, although the house had been built in the 1840s, late 1840s. Now, not to be confused with the original John Woods that we just saw, he had a nephew that also had the name John Woods, but he would have the middle name George to differentiate them. And the Scotch Bottom Farms, that whole property from 4 Mile Run to 9 Mile Run, would be left to his nephews after his sister and brother passed away. Then it fell off to his nephews by the 1830s. And as they grew older, John George Woods built a mansion about 2 blocks down from where the Woods house is standing today. I'll show you on the next slide a map of this area to let you be more familiar with where this was at. But if you notice, Woods, of course, of the last name, and Hazel, because this property was actually called Hazel Hill, of course, for the hazelnut trees, which at this time, I'm assuming that those are some hazelnut trees that would still be on the property. But just to give you a glimpse of this sort of 3-story mansard roof home, very ornate, for the time, and it was of course a mansion. So by combining the Hazel Hill name of this estate, which was quite a large estate, I'll show you on the next map how big it was, and with the Woods name, Hazel with Woods, of course created the area they were called Hazel Woods. And at first it was Hazel Woods, of course with the S on the end, and then of course that S didn't sound so good at the end, so they removed that, and Hazelwood became the name of the area. And I really love some of these newspaper clippings from the 1850s that I found primarily regarding the property here, and they always refer to it basically as J.G. Woods Farm. This one is saying that a stray cow had made it up to the premises of his farm. This one is talking about a building of a home on this property, which in fact could be this home. I'm not quite sure about that. But just some other anecdotes sort of about it being a farmland, and I'll show you, how large that was, as I said, on the next slide. But again, just a little information about how the property was divided. So the brother Harry, who was Sheriff Harry Woods, who was the husband of the woman at the piano in the previous slide, Mrs. Rachel Keller, he was sheriff of Allegheny County during the Civil War, so from 1861 until 1863 when he died. So he actually got the property which contained the old stone house from 1792. There was a street, which is still there, called Berwick Street. And at Berwick Street, it was a dividing line for the property. And then the other brother, John George Woods, would get all the other property, basically from where is Lewis Playground today, where is Berwick Street, all the way until 9 Mile Run, basically is where his property would go. But he would build this mansion on that property around Hazelwood Avenue and Flowers Avenue. So we'll see that on the next map here. We will see that actually after we take a look at the fort, because that did come a little bit earlier than that particular map. So this is one of my favorite subjects about the area, is Fort Squirrel Hill. You do see it on a lot of the earlier maps of the Hazelwood area and Squirrel Hill area, which I really love. Of course, this fort never was utilized because the war had ended before before it was completed, but the area certainly was used for a lot of different things, certainly as a playground for a lot of the kids in the area, but also it would be later built on and around Bigelow Street there in Greenfield. But at this time, in June 1863, this was the largest Civil War fort, of course, built in this area. There were some other redoubts and smaller fortifications in the area, but this was actually the largest fort built at that time. And I love this newspaper clipping here that says, "On the highest elevation on the hills of Greenfield district, the remains of the fort." It would later be called Fort Black, and I'm actually going to talk about that as well. It had a bunch of different names: Fort Chess, Fort Lytle. These would all sort of have to do with the landowners, but this Fort Squirrel Hill was its original name. So I just love this history here. There was a report, I love this one here, it says, this is actually someone who was there at the time and helped to build the fort. And he says that the rebels were coming and the plant was closed down, I believe referring to J&L. He said the employees were instructed to get ready for the fort. The employees were instructed to get ready for work on the fortifications and were assigned to the Hazelwood district. He said, "I was only a boy, but I got in the gang." He says, "We were loaded into empty barges and towed upstream to what was then known as 4 Mile Run by a sand digger owned by Kelly and Williams. Arriving at our destination, we walked up the hill to the spot selected for the fort, and the men went to work." He says, "I carried drinking water to the men, and along with the rest received my ration of hardtack and cheese." I'm still trying to figure out what hardtack is. If anyone knows, I would love to know.
It's a hard biscuit. It keeps well. Yeah, it
Doesn't spoil it.
Right. Doesn't spoil.
I do know. I didn't know that name. Oh, that's wonderful. So he had his ration of this hard biscuit that wouldn't spoil and some cheese. And he said that this was his, basically, I think this was basically his payment for his few days of services at the Squirrel Hill Fort. That first-hand information was just amazing to hear his, sort of how they got up the hill and all that at the time. Just really fascinating stuff there. As you can see, the fort, I love this sort of image of the fort there on the older map from 1863. All right, so then we're going to look also at Fort Black, which is basically the same parcel of land, but again, it would be later referred to as Fort Black. And that name basically would stick with the name of the fort throughout, even in modern times. Speaking of Fort Black, This is one of my treasured artifacts in my growing Hazelwood artifact collection, but this was actually gifted to me by the Squirrel Hill Historical Society by someone whose family who lived in Hazelwood at the time. So this will be available to look at afterwards, but this fort actually, or this post, just basically shut down maybe within the last 10 years or so, as you know, people sort of aged out, unfortunately. So I don't believe that it is still going today. The building where they were meeting is still there, of course, in Hazelwood, but of course, I just wanted to show that because this Fort Black, I mean, this was done in the 1950s, I believe, this book. So, of course, the name Fort Black and, you know, sort of this whole military sort of thing here, of course, would come into Hazelwood. You know, I mean, they named their American Legion after the Fort Black as well, although technically it would be in Greenfield. A lot of Hazelwood residents, you know, also claim this fort. So I also wanted to show a little bit about this Fort Black. And basically that in the 1890s, Colonel Samuel Black, who also served in the Civil War, this is basically how Fort Black got its name. And it says here, occupying site of old Fort Squirrel Hill and overlooking the magnificent tract of land lately donated to the city by Mrs. Shinley for park purposes. So this was an advertisement sort of trying to sell these black lots there on that former fort property, as it had been named Fort Black, renamed Fort Black. So now back down Hazelwood Avenue there in Hazelwood, we're going to see in the 1890s, Hazelwood really becoming this farm and estate. So you're starting to see the estates being carved out of these farms. As you can see here on the 1890 map here, you'll have Henry W. Oliver, the industrialist, and of course, where Oliver Avenue downtown is named for, the Oliver Building, the Oliver Bathhouse, of course. So he had a massive estate here in Hazelwood. This is Hazelwood Avenue actually here. And second, and there actually is a description of his Oliver Terrace plan being sold, where it says the house of the late H.W. Oliver Sr., containing 14 rooms, hall, bathroom, laundry, both gases, hot and cold water, inside water closet, front, back, and side porches, cemented walks, shade trees, etc. Sounds like a really nice place. So this was it here on the map, as you can see. And Ira M. Birchfield, who is going to be a name that we'll talk about for a bit here, was the executor of his estate, which he has a lot to do with both Homestead and Squirrel Hill history, as we'll learn a little bit on the next slide here. But at this time, they were going to start dividing these big lots up. He actually lived next door to his partner in crime and partner in business, I should say William Lewis, who was also a partner of his in the iron business that they had. And he had a wealthy estate, of course, and this is where the Lewis Playground would be today. As you can see, at the time, Ira Birchfield was quoted as saying, "Your remarks about activity in real estate at Hazelwood are not exaggerated. I have myself sold over $40,000 worth of property up there in the last 6 weeks. Cheap car fare is doing great things for that locality. No movement, however, no matter in what direction, can lessen public interest in East End properties. That section has the bulge and is bound to hold it." So cool. So then you would see a lot of the improved lots, and this is also culminating at a time when Hazelwood is basically under a renaissance. It's being improved in so many different ways. You have sewers being laid on the streets, the streetcars, of course, are coming through now. And a lot of wealthy industrialists live in, and we'll talk more about them, live in Hazelwood at this time. which was considered a suburb of Pittsburgh, the country even, and of course Squirrel Hill was even more suburban and even more country. So yeah, this is really cool. Now you'll see in 1898, just 8 years later, you'll see this same property being sold off into small lots there. You'll still see what was the Lewis property. Looks like a James Shields had purchased it. But this would later be the site of where the original Carnegie Library would go on Monongahela Street there. So we'll talk about that, of course, as well, too. And Hugh on this map is actually the Ira and Birchfield corrected plan as he was executing, the will of Henry W. Oliver there. So very, very cool real estate history there in Hazelwood. So just speaking about some of that, I mean, one of my favorite articles ever that I found of Hazelwood, it is on this slide here.
Rise and progress.
Now this slide also features some of Hazelwood's earliest photographs. So these are early 1900s. And you'll see sort of here in the top right, sort of a typical roadway. There was sort of these plank roads that were laid out. If any, road had been laid out, I mean, usually it was just a dirt path. But these were sort of the plank roads. This is down on the Jones and Laughlin Still Yards around the early 1900s. And you'll see one of the headlines at the time for the paper said, the street improvement fever has broken out in Hazelwood. So they were just putting in streets everywhere, and they would certainly go from this to this, or your Belgian blogs, at that time. And this is actually Sylvan Avenue at Hazelwood, one of the wealthy parts of Hazelwood, Sylvan Avenue at that time. And then you also see down at the intersection of Greenfield and 2nd, or Old 2nd, I should say, where the Scotch Bottom neighborhood is at. And then you also see, this is actually just looking up Greenfield Avenue at the same intersection there, where the men are laying out the roads in the early 1900s. Actually, this photograph was on a list of the earliest photographs in Pittsburgh. I believe it's 1905, around. Now, the article itself was quite impressive. I'm going to go ahead and read this one. It said, Out 2nd Avenue, rise and progress of Hazelwood with some ancient history. Homes of wealth and culture. Public attention turning in the direction of street improvement. It's the street improvement fever they have. So, features of money and speculation. So I love that headline. And then it goes on to say, Hazelwood is redeeming the promise made for it 2 or 3 years ago. Which this is 1892, this article was written actually, so they were talking about 1889 or so. Hazelwood is redeeming the promise made for it 2 or 3 years ago. It is one of the most progressive quarters of the city. It is a place of considerable antiquity. One of its founders, Mr. Levi Birchfield, uncle of Ira and Birchfield, was born there 82 years ago. The stone house in which he first saw the light of this world stands on Smith Street and is in a good state of preservation. Mr. Birchfield is now a citizen of Verona and is hale and hearty. When as a boy he bagged game and gathered hazelnuts within sight of his ancestral home, he little thought he would live to see the wonderful transformation he is now privileged to witness. Now, this is in 1892, and when I read this article in 2021, I felt very similar to what he said about how he grew up in this neighborhood and how he couldn't believe the transformation that he was privileged to witness. Now, thankfully, I'm not 82 years old, I'm just 39, but just within the last 5 years, I mean, the transformation has been just amazing to see and to be a part of. So I actually really related to a lot of this article, because it would go on and go on to talk about other things, and I'll just share a little bit in the next slide of what it went on to say. But even, when it said features of money and speculation, Hazelwood today, had, with Hazelwood Green and the former mill site of Jones and Laughlin Still, one of the last brownfield sites and very valuable real estate in Pittsburgh. So it really spoke to a lot of the same real estate deals and the land speculation that was going on in the 1890s, even today. So I really thought that was cool. Levi Birchfield, of course, I did say that he was one of the founders of Hazelwood, which I had no idea about. I was only familiar with John Woods and was only giving him credit. But Mr. Levi Birchfield was born in the stone house around 1810, which is just amazing to know. He does speak about bagging game, which I'm sure would have been a lot of squirrels, because of course this was on Squirrel Hill that we're talking about. And of course he says that he gathered hazelnuts, so that would speak back to Hazelwood being named for the hazelnut trees that were plentiful as well. So this article just had a lot of history to it, and I really found a lot of information, and I'm glad you guys were able to find this out as well. So speaking of Mr. Ira in Birchfield, of course he would have a very big connection in Squirrel Hill, as I'm showing on some of the maps, you know, between 1911 and 1939 there in Squirrel Hill. And every time I'm going up Shady Avenue, I do look over and see this Ira Way. And ever since I was a kid, because I'm one of those street people, so I memorize streets, I know all the streets everywhere. And I already knew that Ira Way, and it just was like, I always looked at it for some reason, even before I knew the connection. But then once I found out, I'm like, every time I go out, I'm like, okay, Ira Way, then here comes Birchfield on left and right. So very cool how Ira Birchfield had a connection both in Hazelwood, you know, early there in the 1890s, and then would later have property and streets named after him and his family, and have a really large connection as well. The Birchfields in general had such a large connection in Hazelwood, in Squirrel Hill, after they would be in Hazelwood. So I just wanted to make that connection as well. As you can see, some of the street signs there, of course, Birchfield and Ira Way off of Shady Avenue, and of course, I actually also saw there was a property in 1939 owned by C.K. Piper, and the name Piper actually is the in-laws of the Woods family, so I believe that that was probably a connection from back then, how they own that property still there, the Pipers. And then you can see Ira and Birchfield himself owning a piece of property on, I guess this is Ira actually, I thought it was Birchfield, but no, this is Ira, so yeah, so that's how Ira got his name, of course. And it has a connection to Hazelwood as well, so I thought that was very fascinating. So as we turn the page here, we're going to go back to Hazelwood, and we're going to continue talking about those fine homes and their owners. That's a continuation of that same article from the previous slide, and it's going to talk about, up here, the principal residential thoroughfares of Hazelwood are Sylvan, Lytle, and Hazelwood Avenues, all of which are being built up very fast with a high class of homes. Among well-known people living on Hazelwood Avenue were Daniel C. Ripley, John Stevenson, J.J. Speck, J.D. Biggert, James Smith, Drs. Hayworth, O'Brien, and Davis, and Mrs. Lytle. On Sylvan Avenue were Messengers Bissell, Everson, George C. Burgwin, Bakewell Phillips, John H. Johnston, Ed Houston, and George Williams. On Lytle Avenue were found Captain Robinson, J. Stevenson, Martin Rankin, John Palmer, and Mr. Lawrence. Second Avenue was largely devoted to business, but it contained some fine homes, among which could be mentioned Hilberg Wynn, as you can see pictured here, Esquire, J.R. McLean, W.J. Lewis, we had looked at the Lewis property, and also Professor Lucky, John D. Scully, who is pictured here, and we'll talk about in a second, Mrs. Simon Johnston, and the Messengers Jenkins, the coal operators, which were up in Glen Hazel area, which of course was not Glen Hazel then. So, and it went on to say that Hazelwood Avenue was the connecting link between Hazelwood and the city proper by way of Shinley Park and East Liberty. So that was talking a lot about the who's and the largest property owners and a lot of the wealthy, industrialists and doctors and lawyers and everybody that was living in Hazelwood at the time. in a lot of these estates. And some of their estates are pictured here. So this one here is just sort of showing some of the property surrounding the Calvary Cemetery and just sort of showing Hazelwood Avenue at its terminus, which at this time I believe was at Saline. Well, it still is at Saline, but this is a different configuration than today, of course. But you can still see Hillberg Wynn owning property off of Frank Street here, or off of Hazelwood Avenue near, in between Murray Avenue and Frank Street, Hillberg Wynn. And then he also owned that Hazel Hill estate down on Hazelwood Avenue at 2nd Avenue in between Flowers. So that was where the Hazel Hill estate that we saw in the previous slide, where that home was built by George Woods, the nephew of John Woods. That's where that property was at, and that's how large it was at this time. But by this time, it's now owned by Hillberg Wynn, after George Wood had passed away in the 1860s. And you also see next to him is J.J. Speck. He has a massive property here. He also owns this property here called the Speck Block, which is where Jojo's Corner Hungarian Restaurant is at today. This corner, he owned that at one time.
Is that place still viable?
I'm going to talk to you about that.
Okay.
And then you also see on this map here the properties of the sons of James Laughlin, of Jones and Laughlin still, Henry Laughlin and George M. Laughlin, who would also have a massive property in Squirrel Hill later that would, or sort of Point Breeze area that would be turned in, that would be a part of Chatham University, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. Which I had a tour of recently. It was beautiful, beautiful building. And I was going to try to fit that on a map, but I just couldn't fit that here. This John D. Scully, and why I have him pictured here, is he is considered the father of the National Bank in America. He actually did the charter for the first national bank in America. So we have First National Bank of everywhere today, but the actual first national bank in America had been started by John D. Scully, who owned a massive property and lived in other properties in Hazelwood as well, but lived primarily here. Who had a daughter named Marion, and the Marion Station on the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad was named after her. But as you can see here, this is actually some information about the first national bank drafting, and it also includes James Laughlin of James and Laughlin still. You'll see John Scully down here as the cashier. But actually, President Abraham Lincoln during the Civil War in 1863 signed this charter. So he is very famous, and again is known as the father of national banks in America, John D. Scully. So a little bit more about the Hillberg Wynn property at this time. I'm sorry about that. So the Hillberg Wynn property that we saw on the previous map, still being called Hazel Hill, it actually had a Native American Indian mound excavated in July of 1898 by the Carnegie Museum of Natural History. And I actually got to go down and check out some of the items here that were recovered. Many of them made it into private collections in people's homes and never have seen the light of day, but the Carnegie Museum does have some of the artifacts down there. But at this time, it said that a lot of the skeletons were crumbled. It actually was here. This is a picture taken from the plate negative down at the Carnegie Museum, this one on the top. But this was a newspaper sort of drawing of that same image, which has a little bit more detail actually on here, you can see. But the mound was only about 4 or 5 feet high. You can sort of see it at its height at the waist of Thomas Harper, who's the ethnologist there, who did the excavation. But this site here, I mean, it was basically about here, because you can actually see this is the fence line on Hazelwood Avenue, and there's like a larger picture where you can actually see more of the landscape there. But it was excavated right here, and then right after the excavation, Mr. Burgwyn died just about a month afterwards. So I think he always knew that there was some thing on his property that, they were, from history they had said, this is where the Native Americans were buried. And then before he died, he wanted to make sure that it was excavated. Because he probably figured that once he died, that the property would be sold off and developed just like it would be. This is very, very cool story that I love about Hazelwood's history. And you can see sort of a inventory that was done at the time that said there were some bone fragments, 3 milling stones, and 3 flints taken from the mound on Mr. Bergwin's place at Hazelwood on July 14, 1898. So these are including some of those items as well. It's just so cool. And his family, who was still in the area, the Bergwins, they actually provided me, they came to an event that I was at with this bottle. This is a photograph of the bottle, but they actually brought the actual bottle of this Hazel Hill wine that was done by Hill Bergwin in 1898. And let me hold it, and I was just like, I can't believe I'm holding this. It was really cool. Someone in the family had taken a drink of some actually too. It was very odd, and they said it was fine. They were still alive. So I guess it was okay. But I just can't imagine drinking that kind of old wine. But very cool history there on that property. So we had looked at the Oliver Terrace. We had seen sort of how Henry Oliver's property was located on Monongahela Street, and then I said that the library was later built on it in 1899. So this was the original Oliver Terrace lot, but then the library would go on it. Hill Bergwin had actually offered his property, that large parcel of land, which was actually across the street from there, across Hazelwood Avenue. He had actually offered his property for the library to be built on that side, but they decided to go on this other side here and build it. And this is just some of the early photos of the library, which looks totally different than today. Of course, the very unique and one-of-a-kind dome that was once on the library is no longer there. It's actually been recessed into the building, so it is actually still there, but it is lowered into the roof actually, which is very cool. And you can see also some of the how it looked on the inside. I did a full talk at the Lawrenceville Historical Society about the variations between this library and Lawrenceville's library, which of course was the first branch library in the world. And all of the designs of the subsequent branches would be based off the Lawrenceville Library, including the Hazelwood one, which did not have such an ornate front as the Lawrenceville one, but it did also include a music hall, which was also unique, which is this rounded part on the bottom. It was supposed to just be a rectangle-shaped building without this lower level music hall, but the Women's Club of Hazelwood at the time had written Andrew Carnegie saying that they had raised $4,000 at that time and would like to have an auditorium added onto the space. And he luckily matched their sum and gave them a total of $8,000 for the construction of it, which gave us a 250-seat auditorium to this space. Of course, this space, in modern times, is abandoned. And that's a whole other thing. We're going to talk a little bit about that at the end. But I mean, such a beautiful building. On the inside, it's still the wood and all the shelving and the octagon-shaped reception desk and everything is still intact. So we're hoping to eventually have it restored as a community center or a space for the community to be able to utilize. Although we do have a new library built, but it is nothing like this original one here. Oh man, this is my fun time here. So everybody loves bingo, but did you know that bingo was invented in Hazelwood? And we can take credit for that. And we have the proof and the documentation there to back it up. And a great picture of Mr. Hugh J. Ward. And when I first saw that picture, I was really underwhelmed. I thought, I just didn't think he would look like that. I thought he might be smiling or, have a little different look, but he certainly has a look that you can't forget once you see his photo. And I think that nobody really in Hazelwood knew this fact, pretty much. You know, I mean, I don't think many people in Pittsburgh knew this, or anyone knew this, to be honest. But when I actually found the article with his picture and some of the information, I was so shocked by this. This was a 1935 published piece that was done on him, and I'm going to read it. It says, Pittsburgh invented bingo from old game. The old game was actually called Howsy Howsy, which was a Canadian form similar to bingo, but it was a longer play. It had more letters than 5, so he basically shortened it and named it a name that was very popular in Western Pennsylvania, which was sort of when you have an aha moment or something, you say bingo, you know, I got it, you know. So it was something popular in the 1920s while he was a carnival barker, and he developed this game. So it went on to say that someone would say, gosh darn it, if he called that number, I'd have went bingo, was sort of one of the cries that you would hear at that time, you know, when people were playing bingo, such as this gentleman here who obviously has gotten the 5 sort of in a row there. And it says, taken from the man who invented the modern version of the game that supplied the answer as to where all the unused kernels of corn go. He's Hugh J. Ward, 45 of 4357 Chatsworth Street in Hazelwood. So when I saw that, I mean, it was just incredible. Since then, I have talked with his great-granddaughter, who confirmed that they still have copies of his patents and a lot of the paperwork that he was coming up with, and he also had invented other games that weren't as popular, that maybe just were at carnivals and things, but she confirmed all the things that I, you know, thought about him. And the home where he lived when he died is still standing. This house actually on Chatsworth is not standing anymore, but the house where he lived when he died is still standing on Johnston Avenue, near the corner of Gertrude there. And a friend of mine who's a member of the Historical Society as well in Hazelwood, she says, I called her and said, hey, I found out something really cool about your house. And she said, oh, please tell me it's a ghost story. And I said, sort of close to that. The inventor of bingo lived in your house when he died. He didn't actually die in your house, which might have been cooler to her, but you know, this is where he lived. So we do plan to have a marker put out in front of the house, which she's been you know, agreed to. So that will probably be the first historical you know, marker that is in Hazelwood, in fact. But I think it's a pretty good story. Just amazing, actually. At the time, too, around this time, this is in 1937, there was an article as well about a woman who was jailed for running a bingo game in Hazelwood. That was down below the tracks there, I think on Lytle Street there. But it says that it was anti-bingo law, again, is puzzler, and that a Hazelwood Legion chief took the blame for backing the play. And I wish I had the whole thing because it was pretty juicy, but I don't like to incriminate others, even though this is something from a long time ago. It had their names and, you know, all the information about what they did, which to me sounds funny today. You know, it's basically like playing the lottery today, you know, but back then it was definitely illegal. But it's just so funny how it was invented in Hazelwood, and then even in Hazelwood, they were playing the game and being arrested for it and put in the Hazelwood jail. Oh boy, so funny. Oh, so we're going to look at some quick images of Jack Delano while he was in Hazelwood in January of 1941. And these are, of course, some of my favorite images. My gosh, I mean, this image here in the middle is used for everything you can think of, even places that aren't Hazelwood, of course. And many people don't know where this is anyway. They just say Pittsburgh. But it is, in fact, Hazelwood. All of these images are Hazelwood. And this image, I mean, the image in the middle, again, has been used all the way in Great Britain on a documentary about industrial Manchester there, you know, in that area. But they're still using our picture here in Pittsburgh to just, you know, sort of show what it was like. But it's Hazelwood. And there's those city steps. So when I was standing at the top of the steps, I was all the way at the top, but those are the bottom there on Tulimet Street. And the Woods house that I'm talking about would actually be right behind this house, right on the corner here, Tulimet in Monongahela. And this is an African-American woman walking down the steps, which many people don't know. She was leaving from the St. John's Evangelist Baptist Church, which was at the top of the steps. So that's where these men and women are standing at. And those are the steps right there where the man is standing in front of. And Jack Delano was so just fascinated by these people that he encountered in Hazelwood this day, that he, you can see how they were staring at him from across the street, saying, "Who is this guy?" And with a camera, and why does he want to take a picture of us? Many people in history didn't realize that they were in history. They just thought they were just doing everyday things, but in fact, they played a big part in history, where their image keeps coming up over and over again. So I think that's really cool. But again, as they advanced down the steps, he went over even closer and got more images, and of course of the Jones and Laughlin Steel Company there.
It's great that he got those smokestacks.
Oh my goodness, isn't that something?
I grew up with those. I never thought that I would never see them again.
And you can see them in the distance, because he's up on Sylvan here. This is pretty far, this is pretty high up actually from the mill. But he had such a good vantage point up there, and I mean, that's just such an iconic image. Some of the other images that are less iconic, of course, is this image at St. John's Evangelist Church. And I'll talk to you a little bit more about this image that has a very fascinating story on the next slide. But you can also see just to the left of the church would have been this vista here, and sort of showing, oh my gosh, the pollution of the coke works and the processes there. Of course, that would have had a rotten egg smell or sulfur, as many of you remember. I actually remember before the mill shut down in the 1990s. I remember that smell and the torch and everything that would glow, just sort of to the left of there. And then you have over here the Hazelwood Theater image, and this is by Jack Delano as well. I mean, this is an incredible image. I zoom in on it, I look at all their clothes, I study every face. It's very cool. And I wish I could zoom in on this, of course, but this was the Hazelwood Theater. And when I was growing up, I would hear from my mom and grandparents and everyone, that Hazelwood used to have 2 movie theaters and, 3 grocery stores and, all these things. And I'm like, when I grew up, there was, nothing. Things were boarded up, things were being torn down. So of course I didn't know that. So to see this picture in January of 1941, I mean, it's just amazing. The little stockings that she has on and the coat, and I mean, there's a black guy here with the, this is incredible. So I can see why Jack Delano was drawn to that. One of the 2 movie theaters that Hazelwood had on its main drag back at that time. This one here is the First Lutheran Hungarian Church. This is today the Center of the Life. And there was a church built in 1925 for the Hungarian Lutheran congregation, built onto a mansion that was actually the brother of Henry Oliver, George Oliver, who was a senator. He had a mansion in Hazelwood on the corner of Sylvan and Hazelwood Avenue, and they built this church onto that mansion. And so the building is super cool when you see it. It's sort of...
That church is right at the corner of...
Yes, ma'am, that looks very unique, because it's like a house built, with the church built onto it. But
Right.
yes, ma'am, this is the side of that church there. And just some of the images that he came to Hazelwood. No one knows why he came to Hazelwood. I'm not sure why, but very, very cool images. I'm so happy that he took those. I'm so happy he took those. So I promise on the next slide, there are actually some drawings done that are very skeptical, I should say. And I'll let you guys be the judge. Now, of course, we saw in the previous slide, and this is sort of just a little different variation of the photos, where they have discovered Jack Delano across the street, and many of them are actually pointing across the street and saying, who's this guy over there? When more members have come out of the church, and now you have 2 guys standing at the steps getting ready to descend, and you can see the mill in the background. And then you also see another variation of that same image that we saw earlier, where there was an African American woman who I think is probably here, or maybe even further down. She has advanced, and now there is one of these men, and it looks like a younger boy or something walking down the steps. Now, these were just, other snaps that Jack Delano took. And I just, have a couple different variations of the pictures, but it is so funny that also I was contacted by an author in Connecticut who had came across on Amazon or eBay or some sort of online bidding platform or something, had come across these sketches that were done. And he, somehow he matched them up with these images and had gotten that far, but really didn't know where they were taken at. And somehow he figured out that they were of Hazelwood, but he still didn't know where they were at. So he contacted me to see if I knew where they were at. And of course, I knew this image, but at this time I did not know where this was at all. And my grandmother was a member of the St. John the Evangelist Baptist Church, which is the same church, but this church caught on fire in 1942 and has been rebuilt down the hill. So I only knew that version of this. I had no idea what this was. So it took me a little bit of digging too, and and there was some information that he was able to give me, just a couple notes that helped me to find it. And then I happened to, there is another image that shows the cornerstone of the church, which is about right here, without anyone standing in front of it. And there was some information on there, and the pastor's name, I think at the time, or something, and I was able to do some additional research and find out the address of it and everything. I said, okay, now I found out, and I said, oh, it was at the top of those steps too, which it's still there. I mean, you can actually see, still see these steps, which were in the back of the church. They're still there, and these steps are still there, but they've been, rebuilt into concrete and everything.
What is authentic is the smoke in the back.
It is, and I looked at I really studied these too when I put this together and said, wow, these really did match up really well. So whoever drew these were obviously looking at these images, which have been done in 1941. And as you see, the sketches have been done in 1945, in March of 1945, at Shinley High School. Now, there is a famous artist who was attending Shinley High School in March of 1945 by the name of Andy Warhol. So this artist, this author who bought these images online, believes that they were early sketches of Andy Warhol. Andy Warhol, of course, family was attending the church in the Run, which is close to Hazelwood, of course, and he was supposed to go to this bar called the Celebrity Lounge, and I'm sure this probably was after this time, or it may have been, or I have no idea. But I was trying to use my, research capabilities to see if there was anything I could find, and I could not find any, definitive answer as to if they were in fact Andy Warhol's, but it really did match up a bit, with the timeline and some of the things that we knew about him sort of having a connection to the area a bit, and maybe why he was drawn to draw these type of images. And even if it is not, Andy Warhol, they're still very, very cool images. And he actually put together a book that includes this information, and he's, not sure either, but it's basically for you to figure out if you think it is or not, just from the information that he gives. But I love them, even if they were not done by him. They are really, really cool. And speaking back to this thing of sort of just how Jack Delano was drawn to Hazelwood and thought there was something cool or fascinating about it. So did whoever drew these images, even if it was Andy Warhol. So I love them, and I just think it's so cool. It's just amazing. My sketch of Pittsburgh, March 1945, from Shinley High School, it just really has some weight to it. I would say I really considered that they really could be. So just wanted to share that with you. So a little bit about Mary Shenley and the Shenley estate. Of course, we know about Shenley Park, but Hazelwood area could have had its own mini sort of Shenley Park there, with a lot of property owned by Captain Shenley and Mary. But this is actually what we're seeing on this map here. So we're looking the Sylvan Avenue Bridge. As we would cross it at Greenfield Avenue and then make a left at that time, that could put you right back on 2nd Avenue, which is actually this road. And this is still there. This is Swinburne or Swinburne? That brings you up in the sort of the UPMC vans and everything would be parked over here and just sort of come up. But at that time, you could just make a left after the bridge. Which is pretty cool, but they definitely had some property right at the river here. You can see the bottom of Greenfield Avenue. If you just continue straight to the river, that would be the Shenley property as well. And that's right around where they're going to be building the new Pitt Bioforge manufacturing facility there, which I'll talk about again in our future segment. But I just wanted to show you that Hazelwood could have had its own small little Shenley Park as well, if things would have worked out right. So we do talk a lot about John Menadeo and Ella Cornelius. Not Ella Cornelius as much. I mean, that is something that I have taken upon myself to make sure that her name is included. And in this new day and age, there has been an effort to include her in all the memorials and everything. When in 1954, when this happened, it just he basically, got a lot of the attention at the time, of course, because he was a hero. He had saved, 5 others' lives and tried to save Ella's life, but unfortunately could not. So they were killed on October 7th, 1954, as a runaway auto driven by George King had come down the hill here, as you can see on the image, sort of had come down the hill with failed brakes, and had hit a pole here and then impacted a group of kids here, including John and Ella. And the others that he did save their life. There was a woman, Betty Jean Gilliam, who had, was almost killed, who suffered brain damage and took years to learn how to walk and everything, but lived a full life because of him and his efforts. And also a woman who's still with us, Ernestine Hollis, who came to the 65th anniversary that we did at the John Menadeo School, which of course would be named after him years after the accident. She came to the event, and when I showed her older picture, which I didn't have time to include here, but I showed her older picture, and sort of was similar to this picture that said she was involved in the accident. And then I said, and she's with us today, and it was of course a group of kids, all the kids were in the audience, and they turned so fast and looked and saw her and just was like, oh my God, because of course people who look, in an old black and white picture, you may think that this is a really long time ago and that person probably isn't alive anymore, but she was in fact still alive, still standing, just as beautiful as ever, and she would not be alive if it wasn't for his efforts. So, I mean, it's just amazing. I've actually gone to the Calvary Cemetery, of course, and visited John Menadeo and his family there at the plots. And also I've gone to Ella Cornelius' grave, which is in McKeesport, to visit them, and we are still very affected by this story. Every, October, is a sad day when we have to remind ourselves of what happened on this day. But there was a plaque that was done that used to be on the Hazelwood Bank on the corner, and the family, the Menadeo family still owns that. We are trying to, get that back into Hazelwood and back on the building once the development starts on 2nd Avenue, where we can place that plaque back where it belongs, right on that corner where it happened. So this is Scotch Bottom. And we had looked at a little bit of Scotch Bottom on the first image that came up, and also on one of those older images that showed the corner of Greenfield and 2nd Avenue. You could sort of see how these buildings would go. But this was leading down to Rutherglen Street, which is actually the street that goes back here that runs all the way to the river, and is shown here on this map as well. So this, of course, is what I consider to be a part of lost Hazelwood. None of this is still there today, except for the steps. The steps from the old footbridge that used to cross Irvine Street as well, and then could take you down right into the heart of Scotch Bottom. Those steps are still there, sort of hanging on by a thread, and may not survive too much longer. There's really not an effort to save them or anything. But it is the last sort of remnant of Scotch Bottom, and basically this would take you right down to Rutherglen Street, where this area is still accessible today. You can still go to where that was at. And I go there and I remember, you know, this image of all the buildings that used to be there and everything. This image here is used a lot as well when we talk about Pittsburgh history, sort of with the skinless wiener sign on the side. And a lot of people, and if you look up Hazelwood history, that picture will come up a lot too, and most people will say, I don't even know where that is. I mean, there's just no reference to that. This all was wiped out between 1952 and 1958. So people who were alive then certainly still remember this. August Wilson, the famous playwright who lived in Hazelwood for 4 years from 1958 to 1962, he wrote about Scotch Bottom and mentioned it in 2 of his plays, Jim at the Ocean and also Joe Turner's Come and Gone. He actually mentions, you know, Scotch Bottom in there, so very, very cool. While he was there, he probably ventured down here and got to see how it was like before it finally all got torn down. But it's one of my favorite places. Anytime I'm down on the old mill site, I still venture over to these steps and, you know, just sort of reminisce about you know, how this town, you know, used to be. Very, very cool. And this was also an area where it was very diverse in Hazelwood. Hazelwood was referred to as the melting pot. There were a lot of other areas in Pittsburgh also referred to as the melting pot, and Pittsburgh in general was referred to as the melting pot as well. But Hazelwood was this little melting pot with a lot of Hungarian, Slovak, Polish, African Americans, and I'm talking specifically in this section here in Scotch Bottom. Also gypsies, you had living in this area too, so this was a very diverse area, but considered lower socioeconomic and considered a blighted area. So then when Jones and Laughlin wanted to expand, they basically, you know, wrote a check, which is here. It was a $100,000 check to purchase the site, essentially, in 1952. And it was considered urban renewal, which is still happening today. The URA was responsible for that. So we talked about August Wilson and him referencing Scotch Bottom, but this is a little bit more about his time in Hazelwood, of course. As I said, he did live there for 4 years. He attended the St. Stephen's School there, and then he would later go to Central Catholic, then to Connolly, and then to Gladstone, which is pictured here, and sort of a newer image that I had taken, but tried to make it look old. It really does speak to his short time there. It does say here in the corner, 1960, he was a 10th grader being accused of plagiarizing a paper on Napoleon Bonaparte. He was 15 years old. He dropped out of the Gladstone School, where he actually lived across the street from the school, which was like right over here, basically, right across the street. There was a house that he lived in. So he dropped out of school and he became a voracious reader, it says, and educated himself by spending his days at the nearby Carnegie Library. Well, that nearby Carnegie Library is this Carnegie Library of Hazelwood that we looked at earlier, built in 1899. This was the closest library to his home, which was here at the time, right around the corner. So he would sort of fake his family out by walking to the end of the street at Hazelwood Avenue, where he should have made a left to go to school, but he would make a right to go around the corner to the library. There are, of course, stories of him, going to the main library, going to the Wiley Avenue Library as well, which I'm sure he did, but it was not as close as this one. And, in his own words, he actually said in 1999 interview here, he says, "When I was 14, I walked into the Hazelwood branch of the Carnegie Library on my way home from the Lewis Field, which is the Lewis Playground, with a basketball under my arm, and it changed my life. I discovered the Negro section of the library with its 30 or so books. Before I was to discover Langston Hughes and Richard Wright and Wilf Ellison, I discovered an obscure sociological text in which I came across the phrase, 'the Negro's power of hard work.' The word power was magical. I had never seen or heard of it associated with the word Negro before. I wrenched it from its place in the text and set it separate in my mind in a high place. But one thing I took beyond all others, that shelf of books gave me the proof that it was possible for me to be a writer. I decided that is what I wanted to be." So I let August Wilson speak for himself. There is such a debate. I am in the process of putting this building on the National Registry, which I have completed the first preliminary step, but I need to do the full application, which was, and I mentioned in there, this sort of story about August Wilson, and I was told, well, we think that he visited the Hill District Library. And I was like, oh, okay, well, I just told you what he said, and you still don't believe me. So, I mean, that kind of stuff, as I'm sure many of you know, is
That's why
pretty.
you can't believe history.
It's like, it's so funny, So history is very important, and you have to be persistent about it, If you don't want to believe it, I'll show you about it, So when the August Wilson House in the Hill District was opened, the historians and architects that helped, that did that project, said they would offer me their assistance, in improving that fact, and getting some more documentation on that. So I'm really excited to, let it be known that this is a place where possibility was proven in August's life. And Hazelwood really was the place that changed his life. So, just really adds to Hazelwood's historical richness in a great way by having August Wilson living in Hazelwood at that time. And as you see also, I have written, of course, about him. This is actually, we had also, through the Squirrel Hill Historical Society, had also carried this same story. So I appreciate that, and allowing that story to resonate further outside of Hazelwood. But you'll also notice that August Wilson was the first and only person ever awarded a certificate of completion or a diploma essentially for his time in the library, as many hours as he spent reading there. He had actually in 1989 been the first and only person ever to receive a diploma through the Carnegie Library system, which really does speak to the importance of the Carnegie Library system, it being started here in Pittsburgh by Andrew Carnegie himself, who, good and bad about Andrew Carnegie, I'm sure, but the fact that, a system that he created could, do something like this, in the life of an African-American playwright like this, it's just amazing. So this will be the second marker that we will get, hopefully near the library, to speak about how the library system in total, not just this library, but the library system in total produced, August Wilson. So that's already one that's in the working. So here are a few images of Hazelwood throughout its time. You'll see the one with the Eliza Furnaces, which were along 2nd Avenue, and of course producing pig iron to be made into steel across the river on the south side. But look at all the smoke that you see. You can barely see this image. And then here, this is in the 1990s, and this is the Hazelwood that I remember. Everything in this picture is gone today, except for there's a little outline of the building there that's still left on the corner from George's Corner there. But the Hazelwood Bank building is gone, and of course the Coke Works is all gone. And this gate is all gone, and you can actually go into the mill site today, which is really cool. But in 1967, there was a robot designed to sniff out the pollution and detect the pollution there in Hazelwood, and actually was on the roof of the bank building here and looking out onto the mill site, as you can see here. So when you think about Hazelwood today as being known as sort of a technology hub and having all this robotics and everything, you would think that that was something new. But of course, history will prove you wrong every time, and you will say, this has already been done. We've already had robots in Hazelwood. It was sitting atop the Hazelwood Bank building, a gangly collection of metal that looked more like a fugitive from a modern sculpture exhibit. I mean, this was great, and I shared this with a lot of the folks down at the mill site when I did a presentation with the ARM Manufacturing Institute there, who are using a lot of robotics, and they really got a kick out of this. They thought they were the first, ones to do robotics in Hazelwood, but William Strong seems to be, or William Strang. William Strong, I think, was the one to do that. So I think that was really, really cool. And they can call that a robot, for that time. But a lot of pollution that they had to detect, so I'm sure it was constantly beeping or spinning or whatever it did. Very, very interesting. I love that photo. Wow, so we made it through the past, and now we're going to talk a little bit about the present, which certainly won't take as long as the past has. Now, yesterday is history, tomorrow's a mystery, today is a gift, which is why we call it the present. So I love that. And, really speaking back to this whole theme of, everything from, the past is a part of today. This is why we're still here today. This is why we're still learning about this stuff today. It's still important today, the past. And here's a little bit about the present. So this is just some of the work that I've been doing over the past 5 years. That would have helped to plug it in from the beginning. I'm so sorry about that. Is there? So that should come right back up. So while we wait for that to come back up.
Quote that you had from JaQuay.
Yes, ma'am.
Is that the one who writes the Family Circus?
I do not know, unfortunately. But I'll have to look up more of him because I love that quote. I've heard that. I didn't realize that he had done that. Oh.
There is a JaQuay.
So again, over the last 5 years, of course, I had founded the Greater Hazelwood Historical Society in January of 2018. Soon after that, I was really involved in a lot of the discussions of the development and what was to come in the future of Hazelwood, which I thought all my stuff was going to be all old black and white images and, sort of the past, but they wanted to hear the history of Hazelwood.
That's not Hazelwood.
That's the future.
That's the future.
Oi.
Sorry about that. So here we are back at the present. So as I was saying, just over the past 5 years, have been able to research so much about the community that I grew up in. Many of these things that I never knew, and many people did not know. Just growing up in Hazelwood. The story of Hazelwood at this time was the mill shut down in the 1980s. There was economic depression, and a lot of people moved out of Hazelwood. There's been crime and violence as a result. And what about Amazon? I mean, that was the whole story, in just 30 seconds about Hazelwood. And of course, there was so much more about Hazelwood, so much good, so much history, so many things that people had achieved, just amazing stuff. that nobody was really talking about. And again, I had never heard of it. So in looking into my own family history there, of course, is which really started the whole thing. And of course, I've always had an interest in the history of Hazelwood and Pittsburgh in general. But as I began to uncover a lot of these things, I said, you know, history happened here. That was one of the, you know, sort of lines that I came out with, and I kept saying, you know, there's a lot of history that happened here. And again, we're still honoring our past and inventing our future. So it is not just about the past. There is a lot that, you know, the future is also going to need to know about the past in order to, you know, sort of develop its own way forward. So as you see, in 2018, I also was on the front page of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette with an article entitled "Young Historian Taking Pride in Hazelwood." And I was 34 when that picture was taken, and now thinking that I'm 39 today, it's like, oh, I'm not as young historian anymore. But
Sure you are.
but I am younger, I guess, than many historians are, so that's okay, and I take that. But also that year, I was able to win the Dan Holland Promise Award through the Young Preservationist Association for the Young Preservationist Association for my work on, you know, trying to get the library building open for the community. And there was so much work to that. And it still isn't done, and we're still kind of, you know, in a process where we may have to start from the beginning again and kind of reform and figure out what might be best, you know, after the pandemic, you know, sort of with funding and, you know, community interest and what is the best use for the building, you know, and what the community would want. So you can see me giving a tour last year in front of the building, and of course I'm talking about a lot about August Wilson as well, and making sure people know that story. But so many other things in the community as well. The John Woods house, of course, as we talked about. Now this is the front of it with this new addition, which is the kitchen. And I had a lot to do with the development of this property, which I'm so happy to have been a part of. I actually worked there for a little bit when they first opened, which was really cool. And I wrote the history on the menu and did a lot of research, and still go there and give tours. You know, as I come through the neighborhood, I'll stop there and tell the story. And then you'll see me in the back of the library here, which is the music hall entrance, where I tell the story that my mom, you know, performed on that stage there, that the women's club made sure that the library had this little back part here for the auditorium. You know, in the 1970s, she performed on the stage there and won first place. So I was to tell that story as I'm giving the tour. The building is really beloved to myself and you know, my family, the community. So we really hope that it can be preserved, because it's been sitting for more than 18 years, just abandoned, with, you know, water getting into the roof and in the basement area. So definitely looking forward to the future for that. Also in some of my other roles, and this is outside of Hazelwood, but of course, as I told you before, I am working with Rivers of Steel. I was the first, and I'm still the only African-American on staff there, and it was actually, you know, a big sort of project that the organization wanted to do with diversifying a lot of the staff and board. So there was another African-American board member added on as well, and a lot of African-American programming. There is a tour that is speaking of the Black experience at Cary, which is very unique because Cary Furnaces, after World War II, had the only sort of Black workforce. It was pretty much an all-Black workforce as far as the furnace crews were concerned. And that was very different than Eliza and Hazelwood or Dorothy and Duquesne. It sort of was very unique, so we do talk about that a lot, which is very nice. And I'm always, you know, talking about the site and, you know, how to make iron and then how iron is made into steel. But very similar to what was happening also in Hazelwood at the Eliza Furnaces. As I said, the Eliza Furnaces made iron, and then they shipped it over the hot metal bridge over to the south side to be made into steel. So the same thing was happening with the Cary Furnaces and Homestead as well. So yeah, just a little bit about what I do there presently. And then back to Hazelwood, these are some images of the current tours that have been ran this year. So we do start down on the mill site. We do go past Jojo's Corner, which is the Hungarian restaurant, which I brought up
Why
earlier.
doesn't he get a coat of paint on that?
And unfortunately, Mr. Alex Bodner passed away earlier this year. So the fate of the restaurant is totally unknown. It was one of the last vestiges of the Hungarian culture, which, you know, Hazelwood was known for its Hungarian culture. It was often said that the H in Hazelwood stood for Hungarian. There's many Hungarian and 3 Hungarian churches there as well, which was very unique for in America. There were not many other places with 3 Hungarian churches in the community. So, and then we go up the hill. We look at the old Oliver estate, and you know the old, you know, like all the sort of mansions that used to be in Hazelwood and the former sites of them. We look at where the Native American mound was excavated. We go up to Gladstone, you know, and check out all of that stuff, and then come back down to the mill site. So they've been really popular. They've been run through Doors Open Pittsburgh this year. We have one final one on the 25th of this month, on September 25th at 2 p.m. So if anyone can join me there, that'd be great to see you. But we have a great time, and everything that we've discussed tonight, you can actually see for yourself, and you know, sort of immerse yourself into what Hazelwood is today. It's a very unique place and unique story as well. So now we're at the future. And again, this is the quote that Lori Marshall and I had created, basically, again, saying, honoring our past and inventing our future. So the Greater Hazelwood Historical Society, you know, will not just focus on, you know, things from 100 years ago, but also going into the future, because there's a lot of exciting future developments to come as well in Hazelwood. One of the main, you know, future sort of developments that are going to be happening down on the mill site, in addition to everything that's already going down at the mill site within the Mill 19 structure, will be another huge structure that will be built as part of the Pitt Bioforge biomanufacturing facility, where the site had received, Pitt had received a $100 million grant to develop this. And it actually will come with a lot of investments from the University of Pittsburgh, including an engagement center as well. So we're really looking forward to that, so that we could be in line with the other H communities, with the Hill District and Homewood, who have already gotten their centers. Hazelwood will also have one as well, to have that place for the community to meet the university. In addition to all of this sort of gene cell replacement and all kind of therapy being created here at this Pitt Bioforge. So that's really what's next to come. This actually, the project I think will be completed by 2026. So that is really exciting to happen. Also on the mill site there will be a lot of you know, development for housing and other sort of innovation and technology driven industries. We already have Michael Keaton, you know, famous Pittsburgher and Batman and Beetlejuice. He has a research facility inside of the mill. Of course, President Joe Biden has visited the mill site and given speeches there twice, and has been in communication with members of the Hazelwood community, you know, talking about investing and, you know, trying to, you know, make sure that the mill site is not disconnected from the community, which has been a problem in the past and something that we're trying to prevent from happening in the future, where those railroad tracks can really cut off the community. So we just want to make sure that what's happening on the mill site has an effect on the community, and that the community can benefit also from jobs or any economic, you know, sort of sustainability down there on the mill site in the future. So that's what's to come on the mill site as far as the future of Hazelwood. And I will continue to do my work. They called me the story collector. That was what the Heinz magazine referred to me as. And I love that. And I will continue to collect these stories that I share with you tonight, and so many more. Basically, you know, I've gotten to the point where I have T-shirts, you know, that have Hazelwood history things on them, and they've become pretty popular. You can see me standing in front of the Bergman School with one of the Glenwood shirts, one of the dying areas of Hazelwood that people don't really refer to anymore, but it was once a vital community within itself. And you'll see me standing in front of the Bergman School that I attended, which is now a Propel school, but I am working at Propel, you know, to keep that story alive, to keep the history of the community alive with the kids that I work with there, with the History Makers Club. So just still trying to keep those stories, things that I didn't know when I was growing up, make sure that they do know, so that they can have more pride in their community and not just see it as an economically depressed, violent, you know, sort of place. There's all this great stuff that happened there too. All right, so thank you guys so much for your time and spending time with me on my birthday. It was great.
Happy birthday.
Any questions? Yes, sir.
Those pictures that you showed earlier, you know, there was a bunch of pictures on one screen. That was probably part of the Farm Bureau administration
I meant to say that,
program.
absolutely. It was part of the Farm Security Administration, giving these photographers a way to make money during
Dorothea Lane
and all sorts of
other
different
and-
industries. Yeah, they have some cool stuff that came out of that. That was a part of his project. I forget to mention that as well. Yes, ma'am.
First, I want to commend the community for cleaning themselves up. I mean, just prior to the pandemic, there was so much, as you said,
Yes, ma'am.
violence and shooting, and all of a sudden it stopped. I don't know how that happened. The second thing I want to tell you, my granddaughter worked, when you mentioned the Center of Life,
Yes, ma'am.
there's a compost pile.
Daniel
that
Little,
she started
that I know him very well. I don't know your granddaughter, but
Is the community using it? They worked very hard building that. That was part of Repair the World.
the community is using it, and I was able to help get the Woods House to participate with giving their trash, which is right down the steps, you know.
Yeah.
So Daniel was, you know, we worked together to get that.
That's right, Daniel Little, I
Yeah.
think his name was. And then, the third thing I would say is, in that area back there,
Mm-hmm.
it could be so beautiful if the trees were trimmed, if the grass was cut.
Yes.
It's, I don't say to put it, cement it, just leave the greenery, but it needs cleaning up. I don't know if you have any influence in that.
I will certainly work on that.
Yeah.
Of course,
And then
that whole roadway, they were trying to open that up as part of the Mon
And then the
Oakland.
fourth thing I will
Oh,
say
yes.
is the Quantum Theater
Yes.
held
Down on the
that
mill site.
show in the mill.
Yeah.
Well, that was wonderful.
Yes.
So
Yeah, we have the Pittsburgh Symphony.
could
We have
be
all
used again.
all sorts of things down there,
Oh,
which has
yeah.
been
Oh, really?
great. Yeah, I mean, it's been so good to you know, play a part in the development of that.
And
You know, just
people-
remembering when it was all closed off and now it's open. It's
and
really
people
beautiful.
were not afraid to come down.
No.
They did, I mean, everything was, it was just lovely. But that restaurant,
Yes.
I've always had my eye on that restaurant, and I'm sorry to hear that he passed away.
Yes.
But that could be some kind of, I know he didn't open it, you never knew when he was cooking,
Right.
but,
Yeah, I was lucky to get some of his Transylvanian goulash before he passed. And I can just taste it right now. It was so sour and so
Lucky
bitter.
you.
Oh, it was so delicious. I know. I mean, it was just one of them days that he was there, but
well,
we miss him so much.
It's kind of quaint, you know, but it just needs a little coat of paint, that's all.
Right. Well, that whole block, you know,
Well,
is
they
going to
built
be
it
built
up.
up again, you know,
Right.
and you know,
Somebody
redone, so.
is taking an interest in that Second Avenue.
Yeah, I've seen the plan. I was a part of the plans and everything
Well,
for
it's
that,
wonderful.
and I've seen it. You know, just those things take a really long time, as I've learned. You know, you think it'd be a couple years, but it's like a lot of process to get all that done. You know, which is one of the things that. Oh, I'm sorry.
That's all right, no, you go ahead.
Here, you
Did you have a question? No, just gonna let him do another question, and we gotta close it down.
Oh, absolutely.
David, you didn't mention, you did a tour of the art in.
Oh yes, that
Hazelwood.
you were on with me. Yes.
And there's just so much new, interesting stuff there, so that's another piece of with Hazelwood. that's
Oh my
being
goodness, yeah,
developed.
Hazelwood is becoming a home for artists as well. I mean, there's so much art happening there, so that's really the new scene there. But of course, you know, iron and coke production and, you know, all that has been replaced with robotics, and now there's, you know, biomedicine and all kind of cool things. So at least the industry, you know, at least there are still, you know, economic viability, you know, in a new industry today.
And another plug, I mean, you're talking about the Mill 19 area, the Hazelwood Local
Mhm.
is what you want to Google. They have programs there
Absolutely.
every week. There's
Yeah.
movies. I think they might have had a Steeler game this past.
They
Sunday.
have
They
all
have it
sorts
out.
of things, so
But there's
it's
lots of
really
things
great.
going on down there.
Yes. So, I mean, love to see you guys in Hazelwood in any type of shape. You know, come down and check out the mill site, a tour. You know, Wood's house for some fish and chips, as I say. Yeah, I'll be there this weekend, so I can't wait. But yeah, was there?
I just wanted to emphasize, Doors Up in Pittsburgh, their tours are great, and you get to actually see these sites. You said September 25th?
September 25th at 2 p.m. And then I know I talked to Maria, and Squirrel Hill's having one too. So Maria's coming to mine to learn a couple of things, and then I'll of course be at yours
Yeah, I
too.
told her I'd help her, but we've got so much on our plate right now.
Yes.
Okay.
But thank you guys so much. This was great. Thank you guys.
Happy birthday again.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.